Well, welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm Greg. Uh, I guess I'm a host of the show. That's it. I'm the host of the show.
Whoa, whoa, that was
Hey,
close. We
it's been a hard week, guys.
I was so afraid you were going to forget you were the host of the show.
Hey, work's been pretty tough at the other job. That's been pretty awesomely flabbergasting, if you ask me. But
I
it's
feel
been a
you.
tough week. It's been a tough week. So I apologize, everybody out there. I'm Greg, the uh, real
Toast.
movie guy, real movie guy, and host of the show here at A Real Point of View. And my other colleagues, and host of the show is Karen D, the movie maven herself, and Mr. Steven C, the guy who doesn't pick a bad movie.
What's up?
What's up?
What's up?
Hey, other than the week being kind of crazy, I want to put a
Yeah,
shout
do
out
something.
into the world that I'm hoping that everybody remembers that we're all neighbors, we're all friends, and we should be happy to be around each other. And so I'm putting that out there that that's what my prayers for the world tonight. Just saying.
Okay.
I completely agree.
Well, then I guess that means we can't fight tonight, right?
Oh no, I said the world out there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're here. That's different. See, out there, I want harmony, peace, and joy. Here,
Uh,
whatever goes.
the gloves are off.
Chaos.
Anarchy.
Now we won't be doing any Hamilton
Oh,
things. Won't be doing any Hamilton things. There's no slapping people with gloves and saying they want to duel or anything. We're not doing none of that.
oh, okay. All right. Never mind
Well,
then.
Ain't no sharpshooters
considering
here.
yeah, there's some serious location issues.
Well, I know people who know people
Oh, well, thanks for completing that thought.
in
Okay, I
places.
was making sure.
In places.
That do things.
So, in
They
places
do
that
all
are
kinds
on
of
planet
things.
Earth.
They do all kinds of things.
They exist in this realm.
And others.
Well, that is
Oh,
specific as okay.
that's oddly terrifying.
Yes, oddly.
Oh, whoa, whoa, look at the time. We should get started with the show before
Okay,
our
so
audience gets together like a petition to get us off the air.
okay. Thanks for putting that in their minds. All right. Welcome to another episode of A Real Point of View. And tonight we're going to talk about a classic actor who has been in a myriad of films. One of those guys that, as Steve and I were talking earlier, when he says something, it just seems like he means it, and it's just a part of what he's talking about. Always seems to be relevant. And he's been in a lot of iconic films. Some of the films, hopefully, we'll be discussing tonight. But our subject for tonight's show is Humphrey Bogart. We looked at Humphrey Bogart a few years ago, but just like anything else, you always bring back some really good classic films, and sometimes the great classic actors just stick their nose right back into our episode, and that's Humphrey Bogart. He's been in some great films, some black and white, some color. He's been an actor for a very long time in film. I think some of his best films are in the 40s and maybe late 30s. So tonight we want to talk about a few more of those films, giving each one of us an opportunity to express our like for this particular actor, basically, and the movies that he's been in. So I'd like to start with one of my movies. The movie that I want to start with is Dead Reckoning. Now, this came out in 1947, and what really caught my attention of this movie, I had to really kind of go back in history a little bit, was when I was a teenager. I was over at my friend's house. not really doing anything in particular. It was a summer day, and we're sitting there talking, and they had like a den slash pool room, and they had a big TV that was, affixed in the wall. TVs had been in a lot of um, people's basements and or slash um, rec rooms. And so we're listening to TV while we're talking. His dad had been there looking at television, had left the room, and so whatever he was watching was still on the screen. And we noticed in our conversation that the volume of the TV was loud enough to where we could hear the dialogue that was going on in this television, and noticed that it was a film, and it was something that was said by Humphrey Bogart that got our attention and made us turn to look at the screen. The cool thing about it was he had this great line. I don't remember what the line was, but it was a great line, and we thought, wow, that's a great line. And then he had another one, and we're like, wow, that's pretty good. And he kept coming with these really great set of great lines, and so it piqued our interest. So we stopped talking and watched the rest of the movie, and that movie was Dead Reckoning. In this movie, two war heroes are brought back to Washington to get medals of honor. When they were called and put on a train to Washington, they weren't really sure what was going on. They later on found out that, hey, they're going to get medals. Well, with the two war heroes sitting there, one was taking this really well, and he was like, wow, is he really excited about, this opportunity? And the other one, not so much so, seemingly shying away from the essence about having to get this medal and thinking more along the lines of a girl he knew. And he wanted to have another time or opportunity to talk to again. So the conversation is going back and forth, back and forth. But as the one medal possibility winner got closer and closer to Washington, he seemed to be on edge. So what happens is he gets off the train. He jumps off the train somehow, and so Humphrey Bogart's character, who's an officer, he's like, "What's going on?" He's trying to figure out, why did his friend get off the train? What was he going through that he was, had to get off the train and run away? What was that about? So Humphrey Bogart took it on himself to try to get and investigate what was going on. This movie goes into a lot of whodunits, a lot of mystery. It's a wonderful thriller where Humphrey Bogart's character has to try to find out what happened to his friend. And I'm not going to be a spoiler with regard to the film because I really want everybody to see it. But he goes a lot of twists and turns. There are a lot of people who are false friends, people who are hiding things from him as he's trying to find his friend. And Humphrey Bogart puts himself in a situation where even now his life is in danger. So not knowing what was going on with his friend, his loyalty to that friendship, them fighting together during World War II, he just felt he owed it to his friend to find out what was going on and try to get do what he could to help his friend. I've seen a few Humphrey Bogart movies, and this one really intrigued me. What about you guys? Do you find any intriguing films that Humphrey Bogart did that the lines that were said just caught you and it just brought you into the circumstance and made you watch that film?
There's so many. There's so many. I mean, he got some great lines in almost all of his films. There was, certainly The Maltese Falcon had a number of awesome lines. The repartee between his character and Mary Astor's character had a lot of memorable lines. When between he and Sidney Greenstreet, when he talked about the actual Falcon, that was very memorable. As Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep. Yeah, there were just it's hard for me to recall off the top of my head what the specific lines were, but he just had a lot of, he got the really cool lines, and there's always like, the Casablanca lines about, um, people not amounting, or the troubles of people not amounting to a hill of beans in this world, especially in a time of war. That's majorly iconic, and there's just plenty of other things like that. I mean, he was fortunate in that was in he had the good fortune to be in movies that were so well written and that had very interesting, nuanced characters. And so some of the things that he got to say, I think if people in the movie said them today, it would come off as sort of stilted or sort of like grandstanding almost. But in those days, in the 40s and 50s, they really meant something, because because they didn't, the lines that he said didn't come off as hokey, partly because people were invested in his character and in the story, and partly because of his delivery. As an actor, he brought the credibility that was needed to convey whatever those lines were in a way that didn't seem hokey or self-promoting or just kind of ridiculous or illogical or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, he's one of my all-time favorite actors, and always will be.
Sweet. How about you, Steve?
I kind of recall a scene in Casablanca where Elsa, when she gets to Casablanca and Sam is sitting at the piano and she goes, "Play it, Sam." And Sam knows exactly what she's talking about. And you kind of get the interaction of he knows exactly what they're talking about, but he just kind of brushes it away. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what do you want me to play? You know what I want you to play." And she's referring to As Time Goes By, which is Elsa and Rick's song during their love affair. Sam resists at first, but she hums a few bars for him, so he goes into playing the song, and it's kind of a touching moment in the movie where you also know that something's going to come out of this where it's like, well, Sam's going to get yelled at, so you kind of feel bad for the guy. And sure enough, here comes Rick, Humphrey Bogart, coming in. "I thought I told you never to play that song again." Obviously, just hearing the song, hearing the notes on the piano, hearing everything stirs up all the emotion, and he can't take it anymore. But he doesn't know she's there. So Sam is looking at him like, hey, over that way. Look at that. Do you see her? She's right there. And then she looks up, and it just kind of goes into the scene from there, which is kind of funny. How a little bit later, you have Rick drinking, and Sam comes in to get him to, "We need to take care of you. We need to get you out of here. We can go drive. We can go drink. We can go take you home. We can do anything." He goes, "No." He says, "Play it, Sam." "Well, I don't think it's a good idea." "I said play it." "Well, I don't think it's, well, then don't play it." And then Sam sits down and starts playing the song. And of course you hear the also one of the famous lines from the movie, "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine."
Yeah.
And it's truly those two scenes together, and they're spread apart just enough to get the real full effect of an emotional transformation with Rick. So it's very, very interesting and exciting, and it just, the way it flows from him, you can almost see him feeling the emotions as it's going.
Right.
Very cool. I mean, romantic stuff like that is very cool. And then to have a guy be able to express those lines, and you feel his hurt, and you feel his anguish and his turmoil, and yet at the same time, he mellows and he wallows in it willingly, willfully, wallowing in his own pain because he truly loves this woman that much.
And when I think, I mean, Humphrey Bogart had a certain mystique. He really did. Because, I mean, in my opinion, he didn't have a terribly expressive face. Mm-hmm. And it's like when he was happy, there was like the hint of a smile on his face, like the corners of his lips might turn up a tiny bit, but there weren't that many like huge like grins or anything. And when he was really mad, he looked kind of stone-faced, and when he was sort of neutral, he still looked kind of stone-faced. And I mean, it wasn't like you could just see like this galaxy of emotions playing across his face. And somehow the way that he used that sort of conveyed a vulnerability with, especially like in those tender scenes with Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca, or Mary Astor in Maltese Falcon, or Lauren Bacall in To Have and to Have Not. Somehow, it's like you as the audience member, you suspended your disbelief enough to impose the emotions that you were feeling onto whatever was going on with his face, even though there wasn't a whole lot going on with his face. It's like, oh, and to me, it's like you almost felt it more. It's like, and if his heart was being broken, you felt it more on his behalf, mainly because you weren't seeing it on his face. When he decides to be the patriot in Casablanca, and the pain of that decision, it's not like his face changed so much. It's just that we in the audience, it's like, wow, he's in a tough spot, and we really feel for him because he's not showing how truly tough this is, and we really know this is 10 times tougher than he's letting on. So it's almost like he was a real master, in my opinion, getting the audience to almost act for him, to convey emotions for him on his behalf. Because because no matter what kind of person he was playing, and he didn't start out in his career playing good guys at all. His career is mostly playing bad guys, gangster. He's just like Mr. Gangster, character part gangster, but he still rooted for him, which is so critical. Especially for somebody who's going to be leading man. It's like, like the audience, no matter what you're conveying, the audience has to kind of root for you. So, and I just find myself, even when he was playing the gangster, like in Angels with Dirty Faces, or, even some of his earlier films, you were kind of with him, even though he wasn't like the greatest guy. Is like, but I like him, he's like, I kind of want to hang out with him. He's the cool guy. And then when he became the leading man, then it was even easier to just say, I want to be with him because he's the cool guy. After all, he's the leading man.
Sweet. So what other movies do you have, Karen, that we can discuss more directly and get your opinion about how cool he really is?
Well, the first movie I want to talk about is actually his last film, which is The Harder They Fall. The movie was completed in 1956 after Humphrey Bogart had already been diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and was, terminal. He was sick when he was doing this film, although, he was a trooper and he made it through. But this film, he acted in this film with Rod Steiger, Max Baer, who actually was a fighter in real life. Yep. And let's see if I can find the other people. I just have them on my queue here. Mike Lane played Toro Moreno, who is kind of like the patsy fighter. And there were some other well-regarded actors like Edward Andrews, Harold J. Stone, Carlos Montalban, who's related to Ricardo Montalban, Rusty Lane, Jack Albertson. So a number of people like that. Basically, this movie is about Humphrey Bogart's character. He plays Eddie Willis, who's a down on his luck fight promoter, or not, I'm sorry, sports journalist. He's a down on his luck sports journalist. He's very well regarded in the journalism industry, but the newspaper that he worked for folded, which is something that's not too unfamiliar to a lot of, well-regarded journalists today. So he's trying to get back on his feet. And Rod Steiger is a fight promoter who's very shady, just really, really, really shady. And Rod Steiger's character comes along and kind of offers Humphrey Bogart's character like a job, sort of being like the promo guy for this fighter who's played by Toro Moreno. He's this Argentinian, really tall, like huge strapping guy who is supposed to be like, the giant killer or the slayer or whatever. And Humphrey Bogart doesn't really want to do this, but he's literally in between a rock and a hard place, because he's in between jobs, he's in between paychecks, he doesn't know where his next paycheck is coming from, and Rod Steiger's offering him a big paycheck and an expense account. So Humphrey Bogart reluctantly says, or Eddie Willis reluctantly says, well, all right. So he's tracking this fighter, and then the whole shtick is that Rod Steiger trots this guy out, Todd Moreno's character out, to all these different fights. And the fights are with like sort of has-beens or, known like patsies or whatever. But the whole idea is to build up Todd Moreno's resume so that he can score a fight like a heavyweight championship bout. But the guy can't fight. He's terrible at fighting. And this is sort of like, these are like sucker punches and basically rigged fights. And Humphrey Bogart's character just becomes more and more suspicious as time goes on. He's like, what is going on here? And he finally figures out, well, this is all like a setup. These are not good fights, not even honest fights. And and this poor guy who's this big fighter is really being taken advantage of by Rod Steiger's character. So in this film, like so many of the later films of Humphrey Bogart, he's sort of like the reluctant hero. So just like in To Have and Have Not, just like in Casablanca, just like, even in Maltese Falcon, sort of like, I don't want to get involved. But then he gets pulled in, and you really hope that he does get pulled in, because once he does, then he's going to do the right thing, because at the end of the day, he's a straight shooter, and he's honorable. So even though Humphrey Bogart's character kind of gets his hands dirty in this sleazy fight game, he's not entirely dirty, because at the end of the day, he decides to do the right thing, or he decides that he's going to do the right thing. So he takes on Rod Steiger, who's basically head of a racket. So, and that's what goes on from there. Some interesting things about this movie are, well, one thing is that Humphrey Bogart and Rod Steiger didn't really get along. Rod Steiger, British, and also, no, was he British? Maybe he wasn't British. I take that back. But anyway, Rod Steiger was very much a method actor Okay, and at that time, I mean, in the 1950s, method acting was not considered. I mean, it was kind of a new thing. But that's what Rod Steiger was all in on, method acting, and Humphrey Bogart hated method acting, and he was like, I can't stand dealing with Rod Steiger, who mumbles, and then he thinks he's done some amazing acting job, and all he does is just sort of shuffle around and mumble. And so, and Rod Steiger was probably not a fan of Humphrey Bogart either, but somehow they made their, you know, lack of chemistry work for them in this movie, since they were, rivals and opponents. So that was cool. And I guess also this movie, it's not one of the best movies. It's not like a great movie that Humphrey Bogart's done. I mean, and I think what makes the movies just sort of interesting is that he's able to deliver his performance. If you know how sick he is, then you get the idea that what he delivered was, you know, took a great deal. So it may not be the best movie in the world. It may not have like the best lines from Bogart, even the best character. But under the circumstances, what he delivered was 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 good enough, because because he was dying. I think if he had been blessed with a longer life, this type of character might have grown stale with audiences after a while. I think, because I think I think seeing the same sort of formula for characters like that could get to be problematic. But he wasn't blessed with that long a life, and and so he stopped doing this character probably around the time that this character was beginning to wear out its welcome. That's how I feel about that. So, but an interesting movie, just because there are some threads of truth that go into this movie. Like I mentioned, Max Baer was in this movie, and Max Baer actually was a fighter at one point in his life. And there are a lot of elements of this movie that actually draw on his career as a fighter. So that's kind of interesting. And, the way that journalists got pulled into, especially to the fight game, they got into ethically gray areas with the fighters that they covered. Again, there's definitely the ring of truth with that. And sort of the way that fighters were kind of like patsies, or sort of taken advantage of by other men who made serious money. But the fighters who were getting banged about, hit in the head, knocked out, injured, hardly made anything, again, a ring of truth. So from that standpoint, I think it's a pretty interesting film.
It's pretty interesting. I used to watch boxing quite a bit, and it too led me to watching films about boxing and major dramas and things like that. And I found myself not liking the other side of the boxing. Boxing, ironically, is a very brutal sport, but I can see the sport of it and see the sport in it. But then seeing the seedy side of things, which seem to be more often than not, makes you wonder about the true realities of the fight game itself. Not just the regular boxing, but even the new trend now, which is ultimate fighting, and what goes on in the background. And yet these things are very profitable organizational things, and these things are very popular in the media, and also popular with fans. And yet on that other side, it just seems so sad and so unnecessary. And this is one of those things that you see in this film, that the seedy side of things is where the control is. And it's sad because now those of us who are paying our hard-earned money to see these things, hard-earned money to be a part in that live in many cases, are not truly getting the worth of what we're giving out because of how seedy some of these situations are. So it's good to see films like that. Maybe it wasn't, as you alluded to, Cameron, the greatest film, but it was very informative, if nothing else. And not everybody's seeing that side of things. And so I think that makes it a little bit higher in merit because of those things that quote unquote indirect education about what the other part of boxing that we don't see.
Right.
So, Steve, you got another bogey movie out there? I know you talked about Casablanca a lot,
but I wanted to say one thing about Max Baer being in that movie, and that's mentioning his son. Just for a brief moment. Of course, we all know who his son is.
We
Max
do?
Baer Jr. But also, he is better known as Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies.
Right.
So, kind of a cool family nuance between boxing and television and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's real interesting. And even though he was a supposed pain in the ring when it came to being a clown fighter. Now, he was the heavyweight champion.
Right.
Clown fighter.
At one time he was heavyweight champion. That's correct.
Yep. The movie I want to move to is, you talked about how Karen talked about how her last movie wasn't really a true great Humphrey Bogart movie, even though it was a very good movie. I want to talk about one of the great Humphrey Bogart movies, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And it's kind of funny about the movie Casablanca, which was a 1942 American drama. And it was it was Humphrey's first real romantic movie in that style. None of the actors, none of the directors, none of anybody thought it was going to be that good of a movie. All of them were very down on the movie in the sense that they figured it was just another one of the hundreds of Hollywood movies that get produced every year. And nobody really figured it would become such a not only just an amazing movie, but also have a cult status to follow, which is very, very huge for all these older style flicks and among the great actors. It's set in December 1941. Humphrey Bogart plays Rick Blaine. He owns the nightclub, kind of an upscale nightclub, but gambling den, called Casablanca. Yay, we've already got the title. But he's a very neutral person while not being a neutral person. He claims that he'll serve anybody and everybody. And you see it in here. German officials, refugees, the French police, a little bit of everybody comes through the Casablanca and generally comes out the other side little for wear. But he's also been a gun runner. He was a loyalist during the Spanish Civil War. So he's got his sides that he chooses whenever he feels the need or necessary. Well, he ends up coming into possession of these letters that basically let anyone freely walk through German-occupied territory, French-occupied territory, and, just kind of be on their way. We're neutral people. We don't affect the war. We're just going. And coming into the possession of these, he's kind of being looked at by the police and other people around him, which the person he got the letters from the person he got the letters from ended up murdering two German couriers, which was the whole reason that they had the letters, so they could pass freely through any area. Um, but the person ends up getting arrested and ultimately dies in the custody of Renault, Captain Louis Renault, who is a bit of a comedy character in this.
Comedy how?
Just some of the lines that he has are funny. He's situationally funny. Like at one point during the movie, he has been ordered to close down the Casablanca, and he was like, "I don't see any reason why I should close down the Casablanca." And his higher up is telling him, "You know what? Nope, you're closing it down. Find a reason." So Renault goes through it, and he's like, "You know what? We're closing down the Casablanca. Everybody out." And of course, Rick comes up. What are you doing? You're closing me down? On what grounds? And he goes, "I am shocked, utterly shocked to find out there is gambling going on here." As a person runs up to him, handing him a pile of money, going, "You're winning, sir." Renault replies, "Thank you very much. Everybody out. Everybody out. This place is closed." So
that role was played by the incomparable Claude Rains.
You are correct. And
I love him in this movie.
He does an amazing job at playing a serious character, but also having a funny wit about himself. When he seems in some ways a mediator through the entire movie between different people, between higher up militaries, between Rick and Laszlo.
And the Nazis.
And the Nazis. And it's a very interesting way they go about the story, with glimpses into the past and Rick's love affair with Elsa.
Okay, perfect. Elsa.
Yep, and their love affair in Paris, and the fact that they'll always have Paris together. There will always be a memory between them. But Rick still has so much love for her, and she believes that, but she ended up leaving him because her husband was trapped in a concentration camp, and believing that he died while trying to escape. She basically fell in love with Rick. She fell in love with another man, and then she learns that Laszlo's not dead, that he's sick and injured and trying to hide away. So she does what she feels is the right thing, and without notice or anything, she runs to take care of her husband. And there's a lot of back and forth as the fall of the city is imminent and the German army is starting to invade. And Renault is being pressured by his higher-ups to make certain things happen. Laszlo is trying to steal the papers so he and Elsa can just flee and run away together and not have to worry about anything, while Rick is trying to assume the point where he wants, above anything else, he wants Elsa to be able to get out, to be able to do, to be free and not have to worry about these situations. So it's really a very interesting love story in the roads that it takes to get there, but it's also a very interesting movie all around by the fact that you can see how international this movie is. There's 22 speaking credits to the movie, and only 3 of them are credited American actors. So they did a really good job of making it an international movie as well as it being an American movie. And it all in all, it's great. I don't want to ruin anything for anybody who may not have seen it, because it's definitely one of those older movies that you have to see for yourself to really grasp how good of an actor Bogart is, how good of a collective cast, that everyone involved does an amazing job working off of each other, even from the extras on down. So it's definitely something to check out, and it's one of the greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, if you're a film aficionado, I don't know how you can call yourself a film aficionado without having seen Casablanca. It's like it needs to be part of your library if you if you consider yourself a liker and especially a lover of film, there are just certain films that in my opinion, you just have to see. This is one of those films. It's Hollywood. It represents the golden age of Hollywood at its best. So I agree with Steve. It's really quite a wonderful movie.
Yeah, I think I've seen it 3 times, maybe.
I've seen
each time I've seen it,
probably more than that.
yeah, each time I've seen it, I see a different nuance in it. So that's what's really cool about the film for me, as well as rekindling the great lines. I love Bogart lines in film, as well as the romance between Humphrey Bogart's character and Ingrid Bergman's character. That film is really a really interesting dichotomy. So,
well, for me, the Claude Rains character actually keeps drawing my focus. I mean, Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. I mean, that love story is iconic and always watchable. But the Claude Rains character is fascinating because he's literally dancing on the head of a pin. He represents. He's the military. He's the police. He's the enforcer. He plays someone who's French, and because the French were occupying Casablanca at that time, but at the same time, you kind of have to be nice to the Germans because the Germans were apparently going to be the new bad boys in town. So, and you really couldn't afford to tick them off in any significant way. But then there's the possibility of Allied forces coming in, and so you kind of didn't want to appear to be too aligned with the Nazis. But then, in case the Allies didn't come through, you didn't want to be on the really bad side of the Germans. So you were constantly. He was like Switzerland, constantly trying to stay neutral. And there was this one part in the movie where somebody in the club stands up and starts singing La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, and everyone starts, people stand up and they just start singing. Paul Henri's character, Ingrid, they all start singing, and the Nazis had started the little skirmish by trying to sing a German song. And then somebody who was with the Allies stood up and started singing La Marseillaise, and it was like, oh. And everybody else started, and they just totally out-sang the Germans, which isn't hard because it's so hard to sing in German. So, and that was just like one of those great moments. And Claude Rains' character, you see like these emotions going over his face because it's like he couldn't really join in, but at the same time, you knew he was really rooting for the French and the singing of that particular anthem, so that's just, I just really like watching him just sort of like try to juggle. It's like watching a juggler with like 8 different balls in the air, and you just, and one of them's got to drop, you just don't know which one. So.
So you've never seen this movie, Karen? That's unbelievable to me.
I know.
Yeah, it's a really good film, and thank you for that. So, do you have another movie, Karen?
Oh, yeah. My other movie is The Caine Mutiny, which is 1954, and it's one of my favorite movies, and probably my favorite movie. I have 2 favorite movies with Humphrey Bogart. One is The Caine Mutiny, and the other one is The Maltese Falcon. I like that even better than Casablanca, actually, and that's a pretty high bar. And what I like about The Caine Mutiny is that here we see a real departure for Humphrey Bogart from sort of the stiff upper lip and, the reluctant hero type characters. And in this movie, he plays a completely compromised, fragile squirm of a man. And so and I think, for Humphrey Bogart to take on this character, I mean, from an actor standpoint, it's always exciting to play these ambiguous people because it really calls on your skills as an actor and as somebody who used to do acting like a lifetime ago. The roles that I was interested in were those particular roles, not where you're just supposed to act a specific way or not, but the ones where it wasn't really clear how you were supposed to act, and you had a chance as an actor to bring something creative to the character, and so here you had Humphrey Bogart. It's almost like, Denzel Washington, the position Denzel Washington was in when he took on Training Day. And there was a big controversy about whether he should do this role because he had always played good guys up until that point. And it's like, well, can you play, what happens if you play a bad guy? And a lot of the leading men go through the same thing. I mean, Rock Hudson really went through that because they just wouldn't allow him to be a bad guy and the same thing with Humphrey Bogart. It's like, well, you're the leading guy, so you can't really play a character that's going to make you look less than really awesome, or it's going to hurt your future box office. It's going to hurt our production values. It's going to hurt our investment. It's going to hurt all these other things that have absolutely nothing to do with you as an actor and your skills as an actor. But, this apparent, he did this role, and they didn't change the role to make the Queeg character, which is who Humphrey Bogart plays, Captain Queeg, seem better than he was. So that's all to the good. The Caine Mutiny is based on a play, I believe it won the Pulitzer, of the same name. And basically what's going on is you have this you have a warship at sea, like a PT boat. This is during World War II. And it's sort of like, I think maybe the war might be winding down at this point, but it's not over. And, so you have the ship at sea, and they're going through maneuvers, going through war games and all this other stuff. And they pull into dock, and then they change captains. There's this very formal handoff of the ship from one captain, and the captain who was leaving was a captain who was well loved by his crew, even though he was kind of he was like a tough old bird, but it's like the tough old bird with the heart of gold, and but kind of old, so it's time for him to go. And off he goes, and then here comes Captain Queeg, very well regarded, sterling reputation, younger. So it's like, oh, okay, well, then he might be bringing some modern sorts of more scientific approaches to managing the crew, managing a ship, approaching, maneuvers with more logic, with more, all of these sort of newfangled, youngish ideas, because he's going to have more vigor, more vitality, and all this other stuff. So here comes Captain Queeg, and he, when he's there at first, it's like, oh, this is pretty cool, and everyone's ready to take orders from him, and then he starts acting kind of twisty, and not in a Shonda Rhimes kind of way, but in a really bad way, and he has these, it's almost like, sort of psychotic episodes where he just has completely illogical outbursts over the stupidest things, like strawberries, or the A War Game, where the tie line, where the ship was in relation to the timeline, and you keep going around in circles until I tell you to stop. But we're going to cut the tie line. I don't care, and of course the tie line gets cut, and then they're off drifting off somewhere, and everybody's like, what the heck is going on there? What is going on? And then it's like, well, who takes the blame? Well, the captain's supposed to go down with the ship. But this captain didn't get that memo. So this captain is finding all kinds of ways to go anywhere except down. Like we're going to find some direction to go in, but it's not going to be down with anybody's ship. So the whole point of the Kane mutiny is that the crew decides to mutiny. He's officially relieved of command by Van Johnson's character. And the rest of the crew are sort of backing Van Johnson. Now, the other thing that I love about this movie, besides Humphrey, Humphrey Bogart is just fascinating to watch because you can literally see the beads of sweat on his forehead as he tries to think of ways to squirm out of the latest screw up that he's gotten the whole ship into, and looking for ways to avoid any sort of blame. So there's that, and that's very fascinating. But then there are all the other people. There's Van Johnson, who, again, is kind of like Switzerland. So he's the guy, he's like the conscience of the ship, and everybody looks to him, especially when Queeg starts acting weird, to sort of give them, he's the barometer of what's right or wrong. And when Van Johnson's character decides we have got to relieve Queeg of command, everybody knows that the jig is totally up and that this has gone on too long and that they have no other choice. But that's one perspective. Then you've got Fred MacMurray, one of my absolute all-time favorite actors. I adore Fred MacMurray, even though we agree on nothing politically. Well before My Three Sons, he played some of the most amazing characters. Especially in the heyday of film noir. He was the star of one of my all-time favorite films, Double Indemnity, with Barbara Streisand. So
no, I have to make a correction.
It's Barbara Stanwyck. Not Barbara Streisand.
Thank you.
What am I talking about?
Yeah, Barbara film also. Barbara
Stanwyck. But anyway, so Fred MacMurray's there.
From Big Valley.
Yes. So Fred MacMurray's there, and he's sort of the intellectual, the smart guy. But how smart is he really? And is he hiding behind his books, or are his books actually helping to inform his actions? And where is his moral center? That's that's one of his characters. And then, of course, there's the young guy who's like this young ensign who's engaged to a woman who's definitely older than he is, and he comes from a wealthy family, but he volunteers to serve, and he's just sort of watching all of this with wide eyes because he's not really sure what's going on. So these interesting characters, and mostly all men. And then there's Jose Ferrer, who comes in as the judge advocate core lawyer, whose job it is to defend the men who decide to mutiny because Queeg gets the ship back to port, and an inquiry is started. And Queeg's like, they illegally divested me of command, and you need to hang them all, because they were still hanging people then. And these guys needed an attorney, and Jose Ferrer's character gets this job to defend these people. And from an audience standpoint, we think, well, given all the things that Queeg did and how truly bizarre a world he really was, of course, it makes sense to have these men have a lawyer, and they have a case. They have an amazing case. Jose Ferrer is dragged kicking and screaming into defending these men because he thinks they are as wrong as they can be. It's like, this is disgusting. I can't believe you all are like, you're what gives the Navy a bad name. I don't even want to be dirtied with defending you, and yet I have to because it's my job and my commanding officer told me to. But there's another side beyond that. And Jose Ferrer's character defends them with the appropriate vigor that comes with having them as clients. Now, what happens, how the case comes out, I won't say, but it's really interesting to watch. And this is one of those films where a lot of times when plays are made into films, the play loses a lot in translation, because of making a play into a film is not as simple as taking the script or taking the play and just throwing it up on a screen. You can't do it that way. So the people who were involved in producing this film understood that, and they found a way to take a relatively static situation, because the Caine Mutiny, from a play standpoint, it works as a play, but it's very static. Film doesn't work as a static medium. There has to be movement. And the producers of the Caine Mutiny understood that, so they were able to adapt the play successfully to the screen by incorporating lots of elements of movement and visual interest that you don't need on a Broadway stage. And they also made sure that they had some damn good actors to play these roles. So, and Humphrey Bogart was just, was amazing. And I just love watching him just, squirm. And this is the role where he squirms, and where it's like, oh my God, he's anything but a hero. He's like, it's uncomfortable to even say that this man. He's so squirmy. So that's why it's one of my favorites. Totally against type for him, and he's amazing in it.
I agree. One of my favorite all-time Humphrey Bogart movies is The Caine Mutiny, and love Fred MacMurray in it and Van Johnson in it, and very disappointed in the character of Fred MacMurray when it came down to truly standing up for what really was going on that ship. So that was I wasn't expecting that when I first saw it the first time, and yet at the same time, I think it probably wouldn't have been as good a movie if it hadn't happened.
Right.
So, bravo that movie. That's a great movie. So I do have one more movie I want to close with. This movie. This movie is another departure, I guess, somewhat of a departure for Fred MacMurray. And this movie, in my mind, brings out the development of a possible serial killer in this film. Now, we've seen Humphrey Bogart in films where he has been the gangster, as Karen alluded to earlier. We've seen him in films where he's been a romantic, but yet there's still somewhat of a mystery in that type of role. In this role is the more of a psychotic thriller where Barbara Stanwyck is involved with Humphrey Bogart's character, who's a married man. But one of the things about him in this film is he's a prolific prolific painter, a painter who is very successful and makes a lot of money with his paintings. He is in a married relationship, and then very strangely, very unexpectedly, very suspiciously, his wife passes away. So a few years later, Barbara Stanwyck rekindles this relationship with Humphrey Bogart, and Humphrey Bogart is a very successful painter at this time, and she just has always been in love with him, and now she has the opportunity to be his wife, and he takes her as his wife. So the movie that I'm talking about is The Two Mrs. Carrolls. So what's interesting about the film is how Barbara Stanwyck's character comes to find out more and more about the man that she loves, the man that she's at this point marries, Mr. Carroll. And the person who's a fan, the person who's watching this film, comes to realize that he's not just a painter, but part of his obsession that he had is what he feels his role is, and how that is affected by one of the paintings that he paints. He paints a painting while his first wife is alive, and it's the Angel of Death. And in the essence of the film, he does something to affix as if he was the Angel of Death himself. And then later on in the film, where Barbara Stanwyck is now married to him, and there's this painting, the picture, she finds out about this painting that he had painted about his wife, his original wife. And seemingly things that were happening in that old relationship are starting to happen in her relationship. And now it gets to the point where she's afraid of what's happening. She finds out that in the original marriage that his wife died, but it was a very suspicious death. And so she's starting to get a little leery here about things that are happening in her life. So this movie, for me, brings out the somewhat of a serial killer element in Humphrey Bogart. He's a very charming guy in this film. And that's how his relationships are. And then it comes to a point where even though he's very successful in his painting, he feels like he's not. He feels like things aren't going well. It feels like things are coming to a head, and he doesn't want this to happen because this happened before. And so he's obsessed with trying to basically cure himself of these ills. And one of those things that he's doing to cure himself of his ills is maybe he's paying too much attention to his wife, maybe to the point of where it's getting a little bit crazy, and a little bit more demanding of her to do certain things and be a certain way. And as she's starting to develop all these strange illnesses, he's coming to the point of where he's doing the same things again and how he's caring for his wife. And so the suspicions are abounding. Is he a serial killer? Is he the reason why his first wife died? Is he the reason why his second wife is so gravely ill? It is a really cool movie to watch. And we watch as Barbara Stanwyck starts to figure out things and see things and starts to not take the soups and the medicines, the things that he's offering her, because now she realizes that that's how his first wife was feeling. That's how all those things are coming to mind through conversations and situations. So is he the real reason why his first wife passed away? That's something that you need to watch the film to see. But I'm telling you, in my mind, as I was watching the film, I was thinking, okay, this is starting to sound very, very, very strongly resembling the things that happened in the past. And you got to watch the movie to see what happens. But I really enjoyed this film.
When was this movie made, Brad?
1947, also 1947.
Okay.
This is again another departure for Humphrey Bogart, because he plays a suave, kind of a not overly debonair, but a suave, good talker. He's an aristocrat. He's a very successful painter.
He sounds like a sociopath.
But he has those moods and those swings and those changes that takes him to the brink. It reminded me a little bit of the portrait of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray was a very wealthy, very successful man, but he had a psychological flaw. And his flaw was he wanted to stay young forever. In this movie, Humphrey Bogart has a psychological flaw. If he can rid himself of this painting that he has of the Angel of Death, I think what happens is the painting consumes him, and it makes him react in a very horrific and way, in my opinion. But you got to watch the film to see if you feel the same way or not. But again, this is a wonderful movie, The Two Mrs. Carols. Barbara Stanwyck is a stellar actor. She's one of the great actors in the classic Hollywood, and one of my favorites. And again, she plays this similar type of um, seemingly early on, somewhat uh, passive actress or passive character that eventually becomes a little bit more assertive as the movie continues to go forward. She played a very similar character, kind of the reverse. She was an assertive character pretending to be more passive in the Fred MacMurray movie that you mentioned earlier, Double Indemnity. So here she is again with wonderful acting chops in this film as well, and you want to see what happens, and you're really rooting for her in this one. So got to see The Two Mrs. Carols, one of my favorite Humphrey Bogart movies, and I think it'll probably be one of yours if you take the opportunity to watch it.
Yeah. So Steve's got another movie, I think, right, Steve?
I do.
Cool.
Cool. Okay.
Cool.
Oh,
Bring
was
it
that for me
on.
to start? Am I
Yeah,
supposed to?
bring it
Am I
on.
supposed to do the thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do the
Cool.
thing. Do
Sweet.
the thing.
Awesome. Oh, I start now. Okay. The movie I want to talk about it's a 1949 movie. It's kind of a film noir styled Humphrey Bogart movie. It's called Tokyo Joe.
Mm.
Humphrey Bogart plays Joe Barrett, who is a veteran of World War II, who after 3 years after the war has ended, he comes to reclaim the nightclub he had in Japan, in Tokyo, before he had left for the war. And so he comes back and he finds that it's still standing there. He believes it probably doesn't exist due to the bombing or anything. He finds out it's still standing there. He meets up with his partner, Ito, who's now taken over the bar, and it's kind of a non-American friendly bar. He also has some goings on with the getting a visa to stay in, and you see where the U.S. has now started to occupy Tokyo and to dictate certain rules and to dictate certain things dealing with Japan as a whole. And he returns and finds out it's mostly intact. And while meeting with Ito and them conversing, he learns to find out that his wife, whom he had to leave there, is actually still alive. And him believing that she had actually, died during the war. And it turns out she was in an internment camp for a little while. He finds out a little bit later, but she ended up having a daughter who's now 7 years old. So you can really sense how much time truly passed from when he left, him not returning till 3 years after the war. So he goes to get her. And he's like, I'm back. I can't believe you're alive. Oh my God, this is amazing. And comes to find out she divorced him and is now married to another guy who works for the U.S. occupation headquarters.
Mm.
Well, they kind of go tit for tat with each other about him getting his wife back. And I had no knowledge of this divorce, and I don't approve of it, and I don't recognize it. So, I'm going to get my wife back. She's going to come back with me. Well, in order to do all this, he has to get a visa because he's got to stay in the country somehow. And he's only there for a limited time. So since he doesn't own Tokyo Joe's anymore, he can't use that as, hey, I'm here, I own a business, I'm a productive member of giving people alcohol. So he ends up going to one thing that he was doing while participating in World War II. He gets into a flight business. He's going to run an air freight business. And he ends up having trouble getting it going until he runs into Baron Kimura, who just so happens to be the former head of the Japanese secret police. And he says, I will front you. I will be the money. You be the guy that does all this. He believes and has been told that they're going to be smuggling penicillin and other, drugs to help the Japanese people, to help the American people and everyone else. That way they can, see that the Japanese, Kimura's people, are very well taken care of and aren't, fully oppressed by the American government coming in. Well, it doesn't exactly go quite like Joe really thinks it is, and Joe even is kind of like, I don't know if I really, really want to do this. Well, Kimura ends up telling him, I know what your wife was doing while she was still here, and tries to hold that information.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yep. During World War II, there was a Japanese propaganda broadcast that was broadcasted over the South Pacific and North America in order to demoralize American troops abroad and really emphasize their families and the difficulties and military losses and to try to really press down. And it was given to the name that was given was Tokyo Rose.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather, having served in World War II, he's actually been able to tell me stories of hearing her over the radio and
really
how talking to the troops when he was in Burma, and how they would listen to the radio sometimes when they knew nothing was going on. They knew there wasn't going to be a real confrontation close, or even after confrontations had already taken place, and how there would be an oppressive voice that sounded like it was a feminine Japanese woman, but it was spoken in English, that would try to dishearten American soldiers, Navy men, Army, and all that. Well, the information that Kimura has over Barrett is that your wife was a Tokyo Rose type contemporary character. So if word got out to the American people, or to the Americans, armed forces, that your wife was, was a collaborator with Tokyo Rose, that'd be a really bad deal.
Yep.
So he ends up doing what he's doing. Well, it comes to find out that he's actually slated to bring in Japanese war criminals back into the country. And they're going to try to create a coup and try to, undermine what the Americans are trying to do for the country and all that. And it goes back and forth with him now getting into his patriotism, where he's not going to stand for this. He's not going to let this happen. He didn't do this to, fly war criminals to restart this whole thing again. He's seen what happened during the war, and he doesn't want anyone, especially Japan, which is where he had his business, but Americans also to go through this process again.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides that he's going to stand up and he's not going to take it, and he's going to, take the whole thing down. Well, then Kimura kidnaps his daughter and says, no, you're going to do what I want. You're going to do what I say. You're going to do what I want, or, you wouldn't want anything to happen to the little girl. Well, and this pisses Joe off. And Joe becomes angry and enraged. And I'm not going to ruin the end of the movie. And I'm not going to say anything extra. But it's really nice writing and really good acting getting to this point. The sense of discovery with his wife and the emotional toll that it takes on him, from discovering she's alive, knowing he can have her back, to you're divorced. She's married somebody else, and she's going to be with him and not with you.
No, by the way, she's a collaborator.
By the way, you have a daughter, and I'm going to let you see her, but not really.
By the way, your wife's a collaborator.
Right. And then, your wife was a literal wartime treason committer. So
So
it's
that means that you're probably not a good guy either. You're just this close to being a traitor yourself.
exactly. So it's really interesting in the way they do it and the way they portray the movie, the ups and downs of the emotions, and kind of that ebb and flow of how the movie goes. And of course, Bogart's character, Joe Barrett, he's kind of a quick-witted guy, like a lot of Humphrey Bogart characters are, where they just it's instinctive. Say the first thing that pops in your head, okay, and somebody reads them a line and bam, bam, bam. And so it's got a few humorous moments to go with all the emotion and everything to kind of break it up, and it really makes it a good movie to watch.
What's interesting about all these films is how Humphrey Bogart's able to stylize his persona and be the hero or the anti-hero or the not so good guy in all these films, and it'd be just as enjoyable every time you watch it. So for tonight, for the rest of the night, why don't we say what the films were that we mentioned tonight so that our listeners can hear them again and hopefully take advantage of seeing these great films. The films that I had were The Two Mrs. Carols and Dead Reckoning. And Karen, what two did you have?
I had The Harder They Fall, which was Humphrey Bogart's last film. And then I had The Caine Mutiny, which was done 2 years before he died in 1954.
And Steve?
I had Tokyo Joe, which is a 1949 movie, and the classic Casablanca, a 1942 American romantic drama.
Can I just mention one thing, Greg, before we go on?
Please.
One film that we didn't talk about, we're talking about, I mean, if you call yourself a film aficionado, I was saying you're hard pressed to call yourself that if you haven't seen Casablanca, but I would equally declare that you're hard pressed to call yourself a film aficionado if you haven't seen The Maltese Falcon. Now, this is probably one of the best and most iconic films that Humphrey Bogart starred in, and this was one film that we didn't talk about. And there are a number of much more well-known films that Humphrey Bogart starred in, To Have and to Have Not, The Big Sleep, The Maltese Falcon, that Key Largo, that Humphrey Bogart starred in that we did not talk about. But The Maltese Falcon, oh my God, that to me, that's like one of my favorite. It's not my personal favorite, but it's one of my favorite. It is a favorite film just because it's so well done. It is so well written. And what's really interesting about The Maltese Falcon is that you have Mary Astor, who's just absolutely brilliant. And she has one of the most interesting characters written for a woman, certainly at that time in film and over other decades. You don't know whether she's a villain, you don't know whether she's a victim, you don't know if she's a perpetrator or if she's just sort of a patsy. You don't know what's going on with her. And it's really fascinating to watch. Just that it's like when women talk about how there aren't any good roles, or the good roles are few and far between. Well, back in the 1940s, that there was a role like that was just amazing, and Mary Astor just acted the hell out of that role. She was just amazing in that role, and then you've got Humphrey Bogart, who just again he's trying to stay on the good side of the police, but he doesn't really like the cops, so he doesn't want to get too involved with the cops. At the same time, his partner was murdered, and he kind of wants to find out, or not kind of, he desperately wants to find out who murdered his partner. He's a private investigator, and his partner gets capped at the beginning of the movie, so he wants to find out, well, what happened with that? And then you've got Mary Astor, who comes into his office, desperately needs help, and he wants to help her, but then she lies to him, so he's not really sure how he can help her, or whether is she playing him, or is she really as helpless as she seems? All of these questions, and then you've got the whole, and that doesn't even get to the Falcon part. This statue of a Maltese falcon that is supposed to be, your one-way ticket to riches beyond compare, because if you just peel off that black coating, it's encrusted with jewels, emeralds, and diamonds, and rubies, and lions, and tigers, and bears. Oh my, so, and these people who are after the Maltese Falcon, and Mary Astor is one of them, but then you've got Sidney Greenstreet. I adore Sidney Greenstreet. Absolutely love him. He usually plays a heavy. Once in a while, he'll play a good guy, but usually he just excels as sort of this oppressive presence. And then there's Peter Lorre. I love Peter Lorre. He's absolutely, he's like one of the best actors ever. And he's just, he made his mark in horror movies, but he's brilliant in The Maltese Falcon. And again, because you don't know where he's coming from. So just a really amazing ensemble cast. So I know I'm dangerously close to talking about a third movie, but if you think you like Humphrey Bogart, or if you think you might like Humphrey Bogart, you've got to see The Maltese Falcon. I remember when I was in college, one of my close friends had just loved Humphrey Bogart. And he would go on and on about Humphrey Bogart. I'm like, what are you going on? And I didn't even know who Humphrey Bogart was then. And he was just like, I can't believe you don't know who he is. He's like the coolest man ever. Well, in college, he was like some old dead man. What are you talking about? He's like somebody who died like 50 years before. What are you talking about? And he's like, you've got to see this movie.
So was Abraham Lincoln at the time, but
right. So was Abraham Lincoln. So he's like, no, you've got to see this movie. And like, so we sat there and watched the movie. He's like, isn't this cool? Wasn't that a great line? This is amazing. And I'm like, well, I guess, I don't know. It's just black and white to me. But then as time went on, I began to appreciate more and more what was really going on. So, yeah, if you call yourself a film aficionado, it's pretty hard to say that and at the same time say, no, I've never seen The Maltese Falcon. I have no idea what you're talking about. No, that's part of your homework. You have got to see this movie.
Do it.
Yes. Do it.
Yes, do it. As Mr. Moto would say, do it. Let's do it.
As Emperor Palpatine would say, do it. Kill him.
As the Masked Marauder would say, well, why don't we just go ahead and do it?
Yes. Anyway, yeah, it's.
I don't have any more. I'm sorry.
Well, we really didn't even have any more before this even began. I'll just say.
Well, I agree. Maltese Falcon, great film. And when you find out about the Falcon, it'll make it even that much more fun. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to us here as we rant and rave about the movies, past, present, and ones we're looking forward to in the future. We appreciate your patronage, and we hope that you'll come back and listen to us again talk about one of our favorite subjects, and that's movies. Thanks again for watching us here on A Real Point of View. Check out the other episodes on our YouTube channel, also by the name of A Real Point of View. And we hope you enjoy all those different episodes. But for tonight, we bid you farewell until we meet again here on the show. And please do enjoy these films. You'd be surprised how really good they are. Thanks again for watching. I'd like to say goodbye from me, the Real Movie Guy, and my associates here, Miss Karen D. the movie Maven, and Mr. Stephen C., the man who doesn't pick a bad movie. And I haven't heard the words that I normally would hear right now.
Allegedly?
You, Greg. Jesus. Oh, man, you better sleep with one eye open.
Wow.
We talked about iconic movies and actors. We also talk about iconic phrases, and that's one for us. So I couldn't help it. I feel like a kid in the toy store. I can't help myself. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my Ebenezer Scrooge. Okay, so goodbye. Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.
Thanks for watching us here on A Real Point of View. Have a wonderful evening.